Hey guys, welcome back to more pro-revenge crazy neighbor Reddit stories. In this Ripe Stories video, my neighbor thought he had pulled off the perfect land grab. While I was recovering from a life-threatening accident, he forged documents, demolished my family lodge, and built 5 luxury cabins on my property. Then he planned a VIP grand opening, and that is when I showed up. Let's dive right in the video and find out what happened. And the first one is titled Neighbor Pushed Too Far, posted on r/PettyRevenge. So for some context, I moved into a 5-acre property back in 2022. It is within city limits, so we have to abide by some of the city bylaws. Between April of 2022 and the present, my neighbor has called city bylaw, city police, as well as the land use bylaw on me over 20 times. For things such as dog barking, building a fence, pellet fence, not permanent, an 8x14 deck built in the yard, long grass, bringing my work truck home, etc. In November last year, the bylaw officers told me to file a harassment claim with the police regarding this. They came and the neighbor agreed to stop with the phone calls and was given my phone number to negate the constant response from various city departments, and so I could rectify any issues more quickly. Well, 3 months ago, the calls started once again. RV trailer parking, long grass, and a noise complaint that was called in when everyone who lives at my house was on vacation and no animals were at the house. Well, after 3 years of this, I've had enough. So today, I called the city in regards to a few issues I have with the state of his property. I first started by looking up the bylaws regarding vehicle storage. For example, we are not allowed to store any vehicle that is not registered or insured, and a permit is required. This man has upwards of 40 vehicles illegally stored on his property. Next, I saw these shipping containers, all 3 of them, and guess what folks, in my city, you need a building permit to place those on your property. They need to be on a properly built parking pad including asphalt, and for the icing on the cake, this man rents said vehicles to movie studios for local filming and he has no business license. So this man now has to remove the vehicles and shipping containers before the end of the month and has to move all RV/utility trailers onto his paved section of driveway or off the property. That is what I call FAFO. And yeah guys, if you have any satisfying FAFO stories from your own life, please feel free to post them in the comments. And while you're at it, if you want to support me, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. The next one is a fantastic pro-revenge story, which is titled Neighbor Demolished My Lodge, so I rolled in with a bulldozer. And by the way guys, this story was submitted by a Burmese viewer. So this story happened about 10 years ago in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma in case you guys don't know. Some background first, my family owned a small mountain lodge in Shan State, Myanmar. Nothing fancy, just a traditional teak structure that my grandpa built back in the 1960s. The lodge sat on about 2 acres of mountain property with incredible views of the valley below. My father expanded it in the 80s, adding a proper kitchen and 3 guest rooms. We ran it as a modest family business, hosting hikers, birdwatchers, and the occasional adventure tourist. Which could be me, by the way, guys. The property had been in our family for over 50 years. We had all the proper documentation, original land grants and tax records going back decades, survey maps, the works. It was not worth a fortune by Western standards, but in rural Myanmar, it represented everything my family had worked for across 3 generations. And it seems like Disney is agreeing with that as well. Anyway, our neighbor was a guy I will call Zhang Wei. And sorry for my Chinese viewers, I totally butchered that name. He was originally from Yunnan province in China, but had been living in Myanmar for about 15 years. Chang owned a much larger property adjacent to ours, about 20 acres of mountain land where he ran a small-scale logging operation. He had always been friendly enough, though there was something about him that rubbed me the wrong way. He had this habit of testing boundaries, both literally and figuratively, and the trouble started about 2 months before my accident. Zhang began making comments about our underutilized property. He would stop by every few weeks with some new scheme. Maybe we could partner on a large tourist venture. Maybe he could lease a portion of our land for storage. And maybe we would be interested in selling what he called fair market value, but which was actually about 30% of what the property was worth. I politely declined. The lodge was our livelihood, but more than that, it was our family's legacy. My grandfather's hand-carved details were still visible in the main room's ceiling beams, and my father's flower garden still bloomed every spring where he had planted it. This was not just real estate to us, it was home. Zhang's offer became more persistent over time. He started pointing out problems with our property that didn't actually exist. He would mention how the boundary lines were not clearly marked or how our property access rights might be questionable. I should have seen these as warning signs, but honestly, I thought he was just being an opportunistic businessman. I had no idea how far he was willing to go with everything. And then came the accident that changed everything. I was riding my motorcycle down the mountain road after a supply run to town when a truck carrying timber came around a blind curve too fast. The driver was probably drunk. This was unfortunately common on the mountain roads, and I had maybe 2 seconds to react before the impact. I woke up in a hospital in Mandalay 6 weeks later, which I think was the old capital of Myanmar a long time ago. My left leg was completely shattered, my right arm was broken in 3 places, and I had suffered serious internal injuries. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive, and they also told me I would not be leaving the hospital for at least 4 months. We had to cancel all our bookings for the rest of the season. Our small staff, just 2 local women who helped with cleaning and cooking, were let go because we could not afford to pay them anymore without any income coming in. Well, about 6 weeks into my hospital stay, my wife told me after a phone call with her aunt, "There's something happening at the lodge," she said carefully. "Zhang has been very active on his property recently." "What do you mean active?" My aunt told me he's had crews working there almost every day. Heavy machinery and trucks coming and going. And, she paused, clearly struggling with how to say this, and he's been telling people in town that our property boundaries were never properly surveyed. He's claiming there was some kind of historical error in the land records. I felt my blood pressure spike, which immediately set off alarms on the medical equipment I was hooked up to. A nurse came rushing in and it took 15 minutes to calm me down enough for my wife to continue the conversation. I've tried to go up and see what's happening, but Zhang has security guards now. They won't even let me onto what they are calling disputed territory. They gave me some paperwork that says there's a legal boundary investigation in progress. That night, I called our family lawyer from the hospital phone, and what he told me made my stomach drop. Zhang has filed a formal boundary dispute with the Township Land Office, he explained. He's claiming that the original survey from the 60s was conducted incorrectly and that approximately 50 meters of what you consider your property actually belongs to him. He's also provided a new survey and has documentation from the Township Office supporting his claim. That's impossible, I said. We have clear title documents going back 50 years. I've reviewed your documents and you are absolutely right, but Zhang has presented what appears to be an alternative survey conducted by a licensed surveyor, and he's got official stamps from the Township Land Office endorsing his version of the boundaries. So what you're telling me is that he has bribed the local officials. There was a long pause. I cannot prove that, and I certainly cannot say it over the phone. But I will say that Zhang's version of events requires us to believe that 3 different surveyors over 5 decades all made the same 50-meter error in the same direction, which would be mathematically improbable. The next 2 months in the hospital were absolute hell. My body was slowly healing, but my mind was consumed with what was happening to our property. My wife brought me updates every few days, and each report was worse than the last one. Zhang had brought in excavation equipment. He had cleared a section of our land and had begun construction of some kind. When my wife tried to photograph what was happening, Zhang's security guards confiscated her camera and threatened to have her arrested for trespassing. Our family lawyer was fighting the boundary dispute, but Myanmar's legal system moves slowly, especially when dealing with land issues in rural areas, and corruption is on crazy levels. And by the way, guys, in case you don't know what's going on in Myanmar since 2021. In 2021, the military seized power in a coup and overthrew their democratically elected government. And unfortunately, ever since then, the country really descended into chaos. I mean, there are ethnic armed groups, newly formed resistance, militias, and they are essentially all fighting the military across multiple fronts, and the military is reacting with crazy brutality. I mean, they are bombing villages, killing civilians. It's absolutely crazy. There's hundreds of thousands of refugees that also came to Thailand, most of them actually. And interestingly enough, China has a huge interest in the country because they invested a lot in oil pipelines, mines, infrastructure projects and so on. And given how corrupt the country / the military is, a lot of the Chinese companies that came into the country can basically operate with very little or no oversight, and they are exploiting the resources of the country and the locals. Also, the military government can basically not survive without Chinese political and weapon support, so that is why they allow all of this to happen. And that's why the story is so interesting, because this is literally about a corrupt Chinese businessman messing with the Burmese locals. Anyway, I just wanted to provide some context because I really like Burmese people and I love the food, and I really hope their situation improves soon. Anyway, the guy warned me that the process could take months or even years, and that in the meantime Zhang was free to develop what the township office had recognized as his property. I was discharged from the hospital on a Wednesday in November, and the doctors wanted me to go straight home to rest, but I insisted that my wife drive me up to the mountain lodge first. I needed to see with my own eyes what had happened to our property. The drive up to the familiar winding road took about 40 minutes. As we approached our property, I kept looking for the familiar outline of our lodge through the trees, but something was wrong. The silhouette wasn't right. When we finally reached the spot where our family lodge had stood for over 50 years, I could not believe what I was seeing. Where my family lodge used to stand, there was nothing but empty ground and scattered debris. 3 generations of memory had been erased, but the real shock was what had replaced it. Zhang had constructed 5 wooden cabins in a luxury style, each one positioned to maximize the mountain views that had once been ours exclusively. The cabins were clearly built for tourism. Professional landscaping had been installed around each cabin, and a gravel road connected all 5 structures to a central parking area. A large sign announced Zhang Mountain Retreat. Below that, in smaller text, experience the authentic beauty of Myanmar's mountain wilderness in comfort and style. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, unable to process what I was seeing. This was not just theft, it was a complete obliteration of everything my family had built. I actually threw up twice before I could work up the courage to get out and confront what had happened. When I finally composed myself enough to get out of the car, Zhang appeared almost immediately. He had obviously been watching for us. Well, he said with a smile that made my skin crawl. The invalid returns. I hope you're feeling better. What have you done? I could barely speak. I've developed my property according to proper legal boundaries, he replied smoothly. I'm sorry if there was some confusion about where your land ended, but the town surveyor was very clear about the correct property lines. You demolished our lodge. I demolished an illegal structure that was encroaching on my property. I actually did you a favor by clearing the debris. You should be thanking me. That is when he handed me an envelope, and inside was a check for what he called compensation for the inconvenience, an amount so insultingly small it wouldn't have even covered the cost of the timber in our lodge's construction. This should more than cover any losses you might have experienced, he said. I've been very generous, considering you were essentially squatting on my property for decades. I looked at that check and felt something snap inside of me. This was not just greed, this was pure malice. Zhang could have offered to buy our property legitimately. He could have proposed some kind of partnership, but instead he had waited until I was helpless in a hospital bed and then systematically destroyed everything my family built. I am not accepting this, I said, handing the check back to him. That's your choice, Zhang replied with a shrug, but I should mention that I will be filing trespassing charges if you continue to harass me on my property. I have very good relationships with local law enforcement. That night, I called our family lawyer and told him I wanted to fight this case with everything we had. I didn't care what it cost or how long it took. Zhang had made this personal, and I was gonna make sure that he regretted it. The legal battle was even more complicated than I'd expected. Zhang had been incredibly thorough in his fraud. He had commissioned a survey from a licensed surveyor who had somehow produced maps showing that our property line was 50 meters east of where it had always been, and he had official documentation from the township land office endorsing this survey. He even had some kind of backdated permits claiming he had received approval to demolish abandoned structures on his property. But Zhang had made one crucial mistake in his rush to steal our land. Myanmar's property law requires that major boundary disputes be resolved at the state level, not just by local corrupt township officials. Our lawyer filed an appeal on the state level and demanding a full review of all historical documents, and this is where Zhang's bribery strategy backfired. The local township officials might be willing to look the other way for the right price, but state court judges are much harder to corrupt. The state investigation took a long time, but it was thorough, and many months later, after multiple hearings and document reviews, I received the court order I'd been hoping for. The state court had determined that Zhang's survey was fraudulent and his documentation was forged and his construction was illegal. They ordered him to cease all development activities and restore the property to its original condition within 30 days. But here's where the story gets really good. Zhang ignored the court order completely. He figured that a piece of paper from some distant state capital would not carry much weight in the mountains, and he continued advertising his Zhang mountain retreat and even started taking reservations from tourists. I found out about his grand opening event purely by accident. My wife was in town buying groceries when she overheard two women talking about a luxury mountain retreat that was hosting a VIP opening weekend. Chinese tourists, government officials, and even some minor local celebrities were all invited. That is when I realized this was more about than just stealing our land. Zhang was planning to use his illegal construction as the foundation for a major tourism business. This dude was literally gonna profit from the destruction of our family heritage. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday morning, and I decided to give Zhang a grand opening he would never forget. And by the way, guys, if you would have been in OP's shoes, what would you have done with Zhang? How would you have interrupted his stupid grand opening? Let me know in the comments, I'm curious about your ideas. So anyway, I spent that Thursday calling equipment rental companies in the area. Most of them did not even have what I needed, but I finally found a place about 2 hours away that rented bulldozers for land clearing and construction work. I told them that I needed to clear some timber debris from my mountain property. Zhang's grand opening was scheduled to begin at 9 AM with a welcome ceremony for his VIP guests. At exactly 9:15 AM, just as Zhang was probably finishing his welcome speech, I fired up the bulldozer and drove it straight towards the property line. Zhang spotted me almost immediately. He came running across the property, his face red with rage, leaving his confused VIP guests standing around the welcome area. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Zhang demanded, his voice rising as he saw me approaching the first cabin with the bulldozer. "Clearing debris from my property," I replied calmly, not even bothering to shut off the engine. "Your property? Are you insane? We have been through this already. You have no legal standing here whatsoever." "Well, I actually do," I said, and I handed him the court order with a slight smile. Zhang's face went white as he scanned the document. This is impossible. I have all the forged proper permits and approvals from the township office." "From officials you bribed to ignore the actual property boundaries, huh? The state court takes a very different view of fraudulent surveys." "You cannot be serious about this. These cabins represent a massive investment. I have VIP guests arriving right now." "You should have thought about that before you demolished my family's lodge and turned it into rubble." Well, by this point, Zhang's VIP guests had gathered around to watch the spectacle. I could see government officials, several well-dressed tourists, and what looked like a few local businessmen. They were all staring at this confrontation with obvious confusion. "Please," Zhang said, and for the first time since I'd known him, he sounded genuinely desperate. "Just give me 24 hours. I will pay you double, triple what the property is worth." I looked at him for a long moment, remembering the smug smile on his face when he had handed me that insulting check. I put the bulldozer back in gear and drove straight towards the first cabin. What happened next was absolutely glorious. I dropped the blade and drove straight towards the first cabin. The wooden structure folded like cardboard under the dozer's weight. The sound of splintering timber and collapsing walls was incredibly satisfying. And by the way, is anyone reminded of the Killdozer story? It seems like this is the Burmese Killdozer. Anyway, Zhang was screaming at his VIP guests, trying to explain what was happening, but most of them had already started walking back to their cars. Nobody wants to be associated with obvious illegal activity, especially when government officials might be watching. The second cabin went down even easier than the first one. Zhang had built these things for appearance, not durability. They were basically fancy wooden tents with no real structural integrity. By the time I reached the third cabin, Zhang had already given up trying to stop me. He was just standing there watching his entire investment get demolished cabin by cabin. His VIP guests had pretty much all left at that point. The only people remaining were a few local workers who seemed to be enjoying the show. And the fourth cabin made a very satisfying crash when the bulldozer hit it. Zhang actually flinched when that happened. The fifth and final cabin was the largest one. Zhang had built it as the luxury suite for his most important guests, and when the last cabin collapsed into a pile of lumber and debris, I shut off the bulldozer engine. Zhang just stood there in the wreckage looking completely defeated. His grand opening had become a demolition show, his VIP guests were gone, his luxury mountain retreat was now a pile of expensive firewood. You know what the best part is? I called out to him from the bulldozer seat. According to this court order, you're responsible for cleaning up all this debris and restoring the property to its natural condition. You've got 30 days. That was 3 years ago. Zhang ended up facing criminal charges for the forged documents and fraudulent surveys. He paid substantial fines and had to compensate several other property owners who had been affected by his boundary manipulation schemes. The property now is back in our family and we are slowly rebuilding. We decided to construct a new lodge that honors my grandpa's original design, but incorporates some modern conveniences too. It should be finished by next spring. And yeah guys, what can I say? OP was obviously an absolute legend, but then again, this could have definitely been a risky situation for him because a lot of these corrupt people in Myanmar have connections to the military or officials in general, and OP could have easily gotten in serious trouble. This douchebag literally gambled that OP would be too injured, too broke, and too intimidated to fight back. Thank God that OP had a titanium spine and gave this Chinese guy exactly what he deserved. As always, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And the next one is another fantastic petty revenge story this time, and it is titled, I reported my annoying neighbor until he moved. I just want peace and quiet and to be left alone. I'm in my late 20s and live alone and I really hate kids. My neighborhood is a group of separate houses without yards that are spaced close to each other. I've lived here for 5 years by myself and it is perfect. Everything I've ever wanted, no yards to take care of, no kids around making noise, and the houses share a large T-shaped cement driveway and none of us have ever interacted with each other. We come and go and stay quiet and mind our own business, and there is a small park down the street with grass for those who want it, literally a 30-second walk away. About a year ago, a guy with a lot of little kids moved into my neighborhood, and as always, I just drove past him like anyone else and closed my garage. Never spoke to him, no problem, but over time he started making himself at home. He would park his large truck in the motor court, which has a sign saying it's illegal because it's a fire lane, and it would block his neighbor's garage across from him, and he would set up lawn chairs in front of his neighbor's garage and have the little kids out there running and screaming right in front of people's houses and garages. So we would have to listen to it and then try not to run over the kids as we back our cars out of the garages. He would rev his motorcycle at 8 AM on a Saturday and wake up the neighborhood, and when his kids would be blocking the driveway, they would just take their sweet time moving. Because of this, I did one simple thing. When I would come home every day and drive past/around them, I would not wave back when he waved at me. And oh, how that hurt his pride. He should have left it at that, but no, he had to press the issue. So he started waving more and then shouting at me as I drove past, and then telling his kids to stop and stand and wave at me as I always drove past and ignored them all. Until eventually, he didn't like how I drove around his kids that were in the way, even though I always drive at a safe and slow speed there, so he tried to confront me. He shouted at my car, then came to my garage as I was already getting out of the car and had the garage closing, so it closed right in his face without me ever looking at him. He didn't like that, so he immediately walked to my front door, saw that I had a doorbell camera, and turned around and walked away. And by the way guys, this awful neighbor definitely has main character syndrome. What a douchebag. A couple days later, coming home, he was crossing the driveway as I arrived, and because he had told the kids to stop and wave at me, this idiot stopped in the middle, so he stood in my way to block my car while trying to get the kid to move, and so I honked for 3 seconds right in his face until he moved. That was our last interaction, and I decided he has annoyed me enough. I live in an HOA for context. So I don't actually care about any of the HOA rules, but I decided to use them all to report him endlessly for every violation I knew of, using my dashcam on my car for screenshots with evidence. His parking in the motor court stopped after they gave him a ticket. He had to throw out the kids' playhouse he had set up next to his garage. I kept reporting him for having an open garage door that I don't actually care about in order to get him to have to stop hanging out in the motor court and, oh, I don't know, use his brain and take the kids down the street to the park. Only took 4 months of reporting him repeatedly, and he just moved out. And yeah guys, I gotta say, that has to be one of the better HOAs we have ever heard of. And even though it took 4 months of reporting, in the end the awful neighbor moved out. So I would say props to OP and the HOA. And the next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story, which is titled Socks Go on Feet. So for context, you need to know one thing about my wife. She has certain joint issues, hips mainly, nothing too big, but it tends to make any activity that involves bending a nuisance. One such activity is putting on socks. She can do it all herself, but it's sometimes easier easier if I do it for her, and I don't mind this at all. So the story happened one morning when she's getting ready for work and I'm still in bed. I worked a late shift, and she approaches my side of the bed with a pair of socks and bare feet. No words are needed. I sit up and proceed to put on the first sock, precisely as you do on your own feet. So I twist and pull the sock until I get the toe and heels parts in place. Well, as I do the tweaking, she says, "They don't have to be perfect, they just have to be on the foot." I didn't say anything, but my inner, devilishly grinning self thought, "Alrighty then." So I took the second sock and snapped it onto her foot about 2 inches past the toes. It's holding on firmly enough so it cannot be shaken off, so technically it was on the foot. Her jaw dropped for a second and then turned into an "okay, you got me" smile, followed by an "I cannot believe you did that" sentence. I proceeded to put the sock on properly, we shared a kiss, and she was off to work while I went back for a bit more shut-eye. And yeah guys, I would say that is what you call maliciously wholesome compliance. Thank you so much for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.